All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnerships Lunch and Learn webinar series. My name is Allie Lewis. I'm the coordinator with the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership. And we are so excited to welcome Calley and Betsy here with us today from Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the Farm and Forest Viability Program. Calley Hastings is the program manager and Betsy McGavisk is the program coordinator. So thank you so much for joining us. As a friendly reminder, I'm just going to share a couple updates about the partnership. So hopefully we can get this to move forward. There we go. And so for those who are new or could use a reminder, the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership has a vision that Vermont will be populated by farms that are vibrant, robust, and sustainable, and that those farms steward their land to improve water quality and wildlife habitat for the benefit of those farms, connected ecosystems, the public, and general good of Vermont. And our purpose and mission is that we'll improve ag water quality by coordinating partner efforts to provide education, technical, and financial assistance to the farming community. And for those who maybe aren't remembering all of the partners that are formally in the partnership, not to say these are everyone we work with, but the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership includes the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Farm Service Agency, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, the Agency of Natural Resources Department of Environmental Conservation, the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, and the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, UVM Extension, Lake Champlain Basin Program, of course, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who are here today, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So our three overarching goals are that we're going to improve ag water quality and wildlife habitat on all the engaged farmland owners or operators' properties, that we will deliver technical and financial assistance in an efficient and effective way, and that will provide the best experience possible for the landowner. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good lunch hour. I'm Calley Hastings. I'm the program manager for the Farm and Forest Viability Program at Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which I told Allie I wouldn't say all the things because too many words. But I'm going to kind of go over the overarching structure for the program that we offer and then go into some details. And then Betsy is going to go over our water quality grants program. So, and I do not have a PowerPoint for mine, and it's totally fine if people don't want to be on screen, no worries, but I'm just going to talk at you, and hopefully I'm going to have a quiz question at the end, and so you got to pay attention really intensely because someone's going to get a prize at the end. So the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board is our umbrella organization. We're based in Montpelier, and there's about, I think, 45 employees at this point. Our program is within that is the Farm and Forest Viability Program. There's tons that's done with housing and VHCB and conservation, and there's a lead program and AmeriCorps and other programs, but we have this kind of carved out program around farm and forest. And our model is actually partnering with other organizations to do the program on the ground. So we work with UVM Extension, the Center for an Ag Economy, the Intervale Center, NOFA Vermont, and Land for Good. And each one of those organizations is doing business planning and transfer planning with food, farm, and forest businesses. So those are the three areas that we cover. So we work with about 100 plus businesses a year, and we've been doing it for 21 years, I think, at this point. VHCB has been around for, I think, 36 years. So it's a model that has been kind of worked over time and we're always adapting and trying to improve, but everyone who's doing the planning on the ground is working within kind of a same model that's been developed over the years. That's pretty unique actually across the US. It's a one-on-one coaching model, and basically we match farm, food, and forest businesses with business planners, and they work for 2 years together doing different types of programs, which I'll go into. But I just want to kind of give you the layout. It can be, I would say, it can be confusing who does what and where and which organization is doing what. And it's confusing for us sometimes too, but I think especially for business owners, they don't always know who's coming from what area. So that's kind of how our model works. So the three core programs that we offer are business planning, transfer/succession planning, and then we do kind of lighter touch programming, which we call cash flow or enterprise analysis. So eligibility, and this I think is a very important distinction that not everybody is clear on, but we are really geared at serving commercial-based businesses. So for beginning farm businesses, food or forest businesses as well, there are other programs that better serve that stage. So the Intervale has beginning farmer services, and they can do kind of a little bit more like a mini business plan with those newer businesses. UVM Extension has a business clinic, which is you can call them up and have 2 or 3 hours of advising from a business coach, kind of on any topic you want. NOFA Vermont can also offer lighter touch services. They support organic farms, but they can also support other farms. And then the Center for an Ag Economy can also support beginning farms as well. But if someone wants to kind of do a business plan and they're beginning farmer and they don't fit our program, I usually connect them with the Intervale Center. There's a link you can send, you can fill out a form and it goes to them, and then they'll connect with the business. So for our program, we're looking for businesses to be grossing over 15,000, to be year-round Vermont residents, and to be having run and manage the business for 2+ years. So, and the reason for that is because to best fit what we offer, we want people to kind of be at that stage of management and potentially growth in what they're doing. So basic process is that someone gets referred into our program, either through a partner organization, like they might go directly through UVM Extension because they met them at a conference or something, or maybe it comes directly to me. And the steps to that are then trying to find a business advisor for them if they haven't already identified one that they want to work with. And so I'll have an enrollment call, and that's usually an hour long, and I'll go in depth into our program, how it works, what we offer, and then I'll ask a lot of questions about their business to like deeply understand where they're at and what their needs are, and then see, are they a good fit for what we do, or should I actually connect them with one, another resource that's in the state. And as people probably know on this call, there's tons of resources in the state. One of the challenges is actually the overwhelm of resources. So I try to be informed enough to be able to connect people with other resources if it's not going to be us. So we have the enrollment call. If they're a good match, they will fill out an application, which I'll also drop in the link later on. We have a food, a farm, and a forest application. It's a couple pages long. They send that in. The program is free, except there is a $75 enrollment fee. Also, in extenuating circumstances like COVID or a flood or a dairy crisis, we can waive that fee if that's feeling like a challenge for a business. And then once they're enrolled, they're either doing business planning or transfer planning mainly. So the business planning model is a 2-year program. And so they meet with their business advisor about every 4 to 6 weeks. Meetings are usually 2 to 3 hours long and often happen at the place of business, the farm or forest business owner's place. Some of it's a little hybrid now. It can be a combination of Zoom, phone, and in person, just to kind of match everyone's schedules and needs. But also if a farm is like, nope, I don't do that, then we can show up at their place every time. We really try to meet the businesses like where they're at. They can be businesses that are doing QuickBooks and high-level tech, or they can be businesses that don't have an email and want to work out of a shoebox. And doesn't matter to us. We'll meet them where they're at, and our goal is to help increase business management skills. We have a really strong focus on the financials of a business. I would say that's what really makes our program stand out. Is a lot of the initial work is getting the numbers in order, making sure record-keeping systems are set up, helping the business get to the point where they can actually make decisions with the financial lens as a part of it. So that's a huge chunk of our work. And then in terms of a business plan, probably many of you are familiar with parts of a business plan, but just kind of a quick rundown, because they'll walk through this process in that year of going through the financials, cash flow projections, getting the profit and loss, income statement, that sort of thing. Then they'll look at short-term, long-term planning for the business, a SWOT analysis. So that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And they'll look at risk assessment, whether it's climate or markets or pandemics, whatever, there's plenty of risks to talk about in a business at this point. Then they look at capital improvements. So if they are wanting to invest in the business, new infrastructure, grow, whatever it is, they look at how to run the numbers on that, and then how they might afford that, whether it's through cash flow or if they're going to apply to grants or look for funding, loans, etc. So we try to have kind of a capital plan that goes with it. And then there's, of course, marketing and sales assessment. There's management analysis. There are a lot of those key pieces. And then each farm is a little bit different. Some might want to focus on certain topics, like they're really growing employee-wise, so they're really focused on HR, or maybe they're commodity milk, so they don't need to do a lot of marketing and sales, but they really need to look at the natural resources piece. Or they're doing value added, and so their focus is how do we grow to New England, and they want a really in-depth marketing plan within their business plan. Every business is super unique, as you probably know. So we really try to create a framework to walk through a process of planning, but there's tons of flexibility within that for the business. At the end of that first year, they ideally have a complete business plan. And that is then what they can use to guide their business. Some people use it to get loans or apply for grants, but it's, that is the final product, but it's really about the process of stepping outside your business and being able to work on your business instead of in your business every day. It's so easy as a business owner, you can kind of get into the just day-to-day survival mode, crisis mode, whatever it is. And it can be very hard to step back and say, hey, like, where do we want to be 5 years from now? Or, do we even know how much it's costing us to grow tomatoes? Should we even be growing them? Are we losing money? Or gosh, we're dealing with a lot of burnout. We don't even have the time of day to meet anymore. So we really help try to create that container for the accountability in a good way. Like, a lot of people reflect back to us that they're so happy to have someone showing up every month who's going to say, hey, let's take out your numbers and take a look at them. So that's kind of the basic process for the first year. The second year, we still offer support, but it's lighter touch. It's more like probably 4 meetings a year, and it's getting the financials updated, and then just seeing how is it going with the business implementation. Has anything changed? Do we need to shift gears? And then by the second year, a business has completed the program. We do have businesses that will come back and enroll later on if they're going through a major change. So it's not necessarily that you do the program once and you're done. At the same time, we try to be mindful of resources. So, if there's high demand for the program, we might be taking first-time program enrollees over second-time enrollees, just to make sure everyone gets their fair shake at the resource. But we rarely say no to businesses that come in who want help, who we can support. So that was business planning. The other track is transfer planning, succession planning. Extremely important at this point in our state. So many farms are looking at, the business owners are aging and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the land, the business. They're looking at, sometimes it's, kids in the family taking it on. Sometimes they're looking at selling, or they just don't know, but they know they need to do something and they need our help to figure it out. So, we get people who enroll for transfer succession planning. That is kind of like technically a 2-year program, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes a family gets started and there's too many family dynamics to kind of move the planning process forward, and it kind of gets stalled out. The transfer and succession planning can be a lot more complicated. There tend to be more people involved, more emotions involved, harder decision making. We really try to shepherd that process through as best we can while pulling in resources as needed. For example, like ag mediation might come in to work with a family, or Farm First, who offers mental health support services. Lawyers are often involved, accountants, bookkeepers. Oftentimes the new generation coming in or new owners will do a business plan because they're taking over, and we really encourage them to have a plan in place. But sometimes it's just a transfer plan with no business plan. And a lot of times we're working with people to help them think about retirement. Hopefully they have some, or they need to have some, estate planning, wills, tax implications of how they might transfer assets. A lot of those pieces, which can be quite complicated. So we are there to provide that service for anyone who wants to go through that process. If somebody wants assistance, but it's not either of those 2 categories, we can offer cash flow planning or enterprise analysis. Those are kind of shorter term engagements. So they tend to be more like 2 to 6 meetings roughly. So someone might want to just look at the numbers and just be like, okay, where am I going to be 5 years from now if I go at this rate, or if I scale up or I scale down? So we'll help do cash flow with them. Another scenario is enterprise analysis. A business might want to be adding a new enterprise. So typical example might be like a cow dairy wants to diversify and they want to add maple or beef. So we'd help them run the numbers on just the maple and beef enterprises to see how the numbers shake out for that. Or maybe a saffron company wants to add raw milk or something. I mean, any number of things where you're adding enterprise, and instead of looking at a whole business plan, you're just looking at that one enterprise. So they can enroll that way into a program as well. Oftentimes those turn into business plans because people are just like, yay, support, resources, excellent, let's do more. And that's totally great, that can happen. Those are kind of like the main tracks of our programming. Let me see if there's anything else. We also have technical assistance support. So if you're enrolled in business planning or transfer planning, there's a small pot of money, like roughly $500 to $800 that someone can pull in some outside expertise to support. So if they needed a lawyer or someone to set up QuickBooks or to meet with an accountant or a marketing consultant, we are able to support a little bit of that as well. And we generally try to bring, the business has the one-on-one relationship with their advisor who's there meeting with them for these 2 years, but the advisor is, trying to bring in resources as needed for specific topics that the farm identifies they need more support on. And then just one note on grants, because that comes up all the time, and just so you know kind of how our program works with grants is how do we work with grants? It's like never ending question topic, but grants are a big part of what a lot of businesses are looking to for sources of income, essentially, or grant income. We have tried to not become grant writers and get pulled too much into that, because otherwise that would become our whole program. But we do certainly try to support businesses in thinking about grants, knowing what grants are out there, particularly like strategy around when to apply for grants and for what. We really encourage businesses not to be reliant on grants and also not to come up with projects to get a grant. More the question of like, is this going to fit into your plan anyway? Would you be able to finance it anyway? Does this fit into the bigger picture? Because it can be easy to just get distracted by grants the whole time. So we talk to them about those questions. We help run numbers, and we do often do some like light review of grant applications to give some feedback. And that's kind of the extent of what we do. With working lands grants that come up, we do specifically offer a little bit more like 2 to 3 hours of support work on those grants. That's kind of outside of our normal programming to try to fill that need that Working Lands has had for business advising support. That's like a totally separate kind of little mini program. And yeah, I think those are the main things. Betsy's going to talk about water quality grants, but we could pause for a couple minutes if people have questions on the program. For food businesses, I'll just mention too, because this comes up a lot, or value added products, we like to, or we ask that people are using like 50%-ish of locally sourced food. It's not like exactly 50, but the goal is to have businesses that are in this program supporting Working Lands. So we at least want a significant amount, or have them moving to a significant amount of locally sourced product. Donald?
Calley, thanks for doing this today. I'm actually learning a lot of things I should already probably know, but do you care how we do intake with people? So when people are interested in this program, do we need to know to send them to Intervale or to send them to CAE or wherever, or can we just send them to you and then have you sort them out?
Yeah, that is my job. That's what I do. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think send them to me and I'll kind of do the like intake call. I do an intake call with every single business, even if they came in through CAE, I still do the intake call to go over everything about our program, our expectations, guidelines, how it's going to work, etc. Also, if you have any questions, if you're like, oh, I just don't know if they're a good fit or not, and they may not be, but I'm very happy to talk to any business. And I'll get back to them really quickly and we can sort out like, is this the right thing or not? Is this the right timing? I will say in terms of a good fit, because one common thing is we get referrals in from people who think a business might be a good fit. They're like, oh yeah, they would benefit from that. And they might, but they might not be a good fit because they don't have the time, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the buy-in from other partners to do a program like this, any number of reasons. And so I think that's like what's important in my role, is to really like help assess, like, do they want what our program has to offer? Because we have high expectations of people in our program, in the sense that like we are asking them to meet like once a month or so. There's kind of homework in between of information back and forth. We really try to have businesses like be consistent in showing up to meetings, because otherwise if they disappear for 6 months, that's half the year of the program. It's really what businesses put into it, they're going to get out of it. So I really try to be clear when I'm talking to them, so they know like what it is they're signing up for. If they don't want that level of investment or involvement, that's totally fine. And that's why they can do like lighter touch services like cash flow or enterprise, or they could work with somebody like Intervale and some of their other programs. Like, I think there's always a program and a resource in Vermont for a business in a way that doesn't exist in other states. So we're really lucky. And my role is to just really help figure out, like, is this the program, the right time, the right place for the right business? And if not, who can I connect them with?
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's great. Almost anyone that's heading for conservation, if they don't have an existing farm, we send them to you, I think, now anyway. So we're kind of counting on you for that. But thank you for answering that. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so ag, forest, and tree nursery question. So tree nurseries can qualify. They, a lot of nurseries are purchasing all their stock from out of state and reselling it, so that wouldn't qualify. But if they're growing some of their own product, hopefully somewhat of a significant amount, or at least moving towards that, then they can enroll. We have worked with some nurseries over the years, and yeah, the forest business programming, I'll give a little caveat to that. That's newer. That's like 8 years old. And there's not a lot of business advising services available for forest businesses in Vermont. So we're actually a little bit more flexible in that programming. If someone's more like a newer stage, not as commercial scale, that kind of thing, like we will tend to still try to fit them in some way. We do business clinics through UVM for forest too, so they could still just do a 2 to 3 hour business advising thing. But yeah, because we can't just say like, oh, go to Intervale for beginning forest businesses. So we do, if there's a forest who wants this kind of help, we really try to meet them where they're at. Yeah. And I'm super available. I'm always happy to chat on the phone with anybody, including anyone who's on this call. So I'll drop my email and my phone number. And I think happy to ask other questions that they come up, but we could switch over to Betsy at this point.
Great. Thanks, Calley. And so I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to try to not read from it too much, but it can be helpful and has some nice photos. So I'm going to share my screen. Maybe. All right, is that clear?
That's good.
Okay. And so, again, I'm Betsy McGavisk. I'm the program coordinator for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board's Farm and Forest Viability Program. And what all of those words really translate into is I help run our water quality grant program and a smaller grant program that we have only for clients of our business planning work, which I'm not going to be talking about because it's pretty small, and we don't always have it available. So I run our water quality grants program, do some other things as well. And Calley already spoke to this in the beginning of the presentation, but we are nestled within the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which is a large organization that has its fingers in a lot of different pots, and is doing great work to enhance housing and conservation goals in the state. And so we kind of fall within the conservation wing of the program, but we are not directly working with, we have other staff members that are specifically working on agricultural easements and things like that. And so if there are questions about that, I'm happy to pass you along to our other team members that do that work. But we can't speak to that too much. And so this is the advising program that Calley just spoke about. And so this is our water quality grants program, which is quite different than our business planning program. We do request financials. It's great if you have a business plan when you're applying to the water quality grants program, but in general, they're totally separate. You don't need to have enrolled in the business planning program to apply to the water quality grants program. but it is convenient that Calley and I work together and can make referrals to one another in that way. And so our water quality grant program is primarily for farms or other farm businesses. So nonprofits that have a farm, a custom operator could also be eligible. These are up to $50,000 grants that have a 1-to-1 match requirement for a discrete project that will improve water quality on Vermont's agricultural land. And so these need to be on farm and have long lasting impacts, so 5 or more years. And we are really only able to fund kind of the capital improvement side of things. We can't unfortunately fund like a farmer's labor towards that. And we also can't fund like general operating costs. But in general, we do have a fairly flexible pot of money. These are funded through state bond dollars, which is similar to what some of the state programs are also funded with. But I think because it is through VHCB, which is more of a nonprofit than a state agency, we have a little bit more flexibility and how we use them. And so often the way that I talk about these dollars is, so there are state and federal water quality project or grants available for farms. So that's, I'm thinking like the NRCS EQIP program, Agency of Agriculture's Best Management BMP program, or the Agency of Agriculture's SEAP program, the Capital Equipment Assistance Program, and that helps provide funding for equipment. And so with especially BMP and EQIP, those can provide farms with a lot of money, and they can provide engineering support. You know, you can get a planner out to your farm to help you figure out, you know, take a look at the land, figure out the issues, and help design a project that will, you know, either prevent runoff, fix your leaky feed bunk or something like that. We cannot provide any of that TA support, but we can provide kind of funds in those places where maybe those programs can't. So for example, EQIP and BMP, they can only provide funds up to 90% of the project cost. And sometimes there's some random things that those funds can't cover, like shipping, which may end up being a really big cost for you, or that 10% could be $40,000, $50,000, depending on the size of your project. And so that's a great place where our funding can come in to fill those gaps, because again, we do have a 1-to-1 farm match requirement. The other place where we are great, or that I find that our program can really come in handy, is if for whatever reason the project, the equipment, or the business itself isn't eligible or has maxed out on those other programs and is no longer eligible for those, but still has some clear water quality needs or improvements that could be made. And so sometimes that's like a type of equipment that for whatever reason, like feed equipment that hasn't been as competitive in SEAP rounds, or if your farm has maxed out on your EQIP contracts, you could come to us. And then eligibility, generally a farm or farm business that is grossing at least 15,000. I see that we usually are funding dairy farms, livestock farms, because they have the biggest water quality concerns, but a veggie farm, another farm could be eligible. And maybe in a less competitive year, they could be funded maybe for like some type of like soil improvement project, but I haven't seen that be successful yet, but I'm holding out hope that one of these days we will be able to. So again, we have fairly flexible funds. This is both for construction, infrastructure, and equipment. So manure management, like bedded packs, manure pits, covered animal housing. Equipment includes manure injection, no-till. In less competitive years, we've been able to fund feed-related equipment. So hay balers or baggers, or I'll go to the next slide and show a farm that received funds for a hay merger. If you can make the case that by reducing the amount of on-farm, or reducing the amount of feed that you're buying from, you know, out of state and bringing onto your farm, and being able to use more of what you're able to grow yourself, that is reducing the amount of nutrients that you're bringing onto your farm, that's ultimately resulting in runoff. If it means that you will be relying on a leaky bunk less. Like there's different ways to play out those feed equipment requests, and I think that's still something that is kind of playing out within our program as well as others in the state. But in less competitive years, it's been able to be something that we can fund. Similarly, grazing infrastructure, fencing, it is eligible in more competitive years where we have a lot of requests for a leaky manure pit that needs upgrading. Those will usually take priority because they have the most acute water quality concerns. But in some years, we are able to fund grazing infrastructure as well. And a lot of times those are co-funded with the pasture surface water fencing program through the Agency of Agriculture. And then for what is eligible cost-wise, again, like I said, equipment, construction, your materials, your hired labor, your contractors, shipping, and then things that aren't eligible are your day-to-day business expenses, fuel, feed, and then your own labor. Those things can count towards, or your own labor can count towards the 50% match requirement, but unfortunately, that is not something that we can reimburse for. We do not require a farmer match, so that 50% can entirely be other grant funds. That can entirely be labor, if that would make sense. But at one point we did require a 10% farm match, but then a few years ago we did away with that. So that does help us slot in a little bit easier with those projects that are being co-funded with Agency of Agriculture or EQIP funds that do have that 90% cap. So here's some of those photos I was talking about. These are some grantees from the last few years. Four Girls Dairy, Peter Rainville up in Fairfax. They received funds for, like I said, a hay merger, so allowing him to feed more of his own forage on farm rather than bringing in feed from out of state. And this was something that I think he may have actually received a match waiver for, so he didn't have the one-to-one match requirement, but there was no other kind of agency or NRCS funding involved. In those cases, we do usually see that there is a farm is funding that with their own funds, with a loan, with their own labor, and we do offer match waivers in some of those cases. And then another example is Cornerstone Dairy in Irisburg. They requested funds for manure injection equipment, and they had received SEEP funding, so Agency of Agriculture equipment funding for this. And we were able to provide, I think, that last 10%. Also, sometimes with manure injection in particular, maybe SEEP can get you the equipment, the hose, the cart to do like the first half mile around your home farm. But if you want to be able to do fields beyond that, you could apply to us for some extra hoses or some extra equipment to get beyond the first few fields that you could get through the Agency of Agriculture. So that's another way that we can kind of work together to fund a project. And then Chandler Pond Farm up in South Wheelock, they got funding from the Agency of Agriculture's BMP program for a wood chip barnyard. I can't remember the engineer on that program or on that project, but they designed a wood chip barnyard together and then applied to us for that last 10%. And it's a great project, and they're really, really sweet folks. So our application, what we require is a online form, and I know that oftentimes conservation district staff have been really helpful in supporting farms apply to this program, supporting with that application, and figuring out how VHCB kind of fits in with the rest of a project's funding scheme. And so if there's any conservation district staff on here that wants to talk more in depth about how to complete the application, I'm always happy to do that. And so we do require this online form. We request a project budget. So especially if we are going to be in the mix with some other funding sources, figuring out like what exactly is VHCB funding? Are there certain things that for whatever reason aren't eligible for BMP, for NRCS? We do request farm financials. Usually an application will score higher if those are complete, for example, like a complete balance sheet, cash flow, and profit and loss statement. However, we will accept taxes or your tax returns from the most recent year. If for whatever reason you don't have those available, we request a map for the project area. And then we also require quotes for equipment. I strongly recommend, if you are applying for anything else, to also include like your quote from your contractor if you're doing some type of construction project. You can also include letters of support, which again, conservation district staff, viability program advisors have always been really great to provide that additional layer of support to applications, because again, we can't go out to the farms to make those funding calls. It's really helpful to see kind of what are the other organizations and advisors at play there. And you can also submit photos and a business plan. And so the award criteria, number one is water quality impact. So that's kind of what I was saying earlier. If there is a really acute water quality concern, if you need to do this project to comply with the required agricultural practices, that will often make your project more competitive. But we are part of the Farm and Forest Viability Program. We are also looking for some type of co-benefit from the projects that we are funding. So if you can make a case in your application that this will improve your bottom line, this will have some type of positive impact on your relationship with the community, if this will support your farm's adaptation to climate change, those are all really great things that to be able to address in your application as well. We look for the feasibility of a project. So that includes, match engineering. Does it look like a farm can go through with this and realistically afford this project? Usually, if a farm is reaching out to me about like a water quality project that they have in mind, that they have an idea for, I usually say, that sounds great. You should reach out to your NRCS staff, Agency of Ag, Conservation District staff first to kind of get those plans on the ground, to get an engineer out there, and then apply to VHCB once things have moved further along. And then need, so again, do you need this project to be able to comply with state regulations? If you've applied to other programs and have not gotten them, if you've maxed out, if you are, for whatever reason, ineligible, that can contribute towards or count towards that criteria area. So if you really have no other options but VHCB funds, that can make your application stronger. And then we also will look for good standing with other state regulations. And if you've received other awards from VHCB, that doesn't necessarily disqualify you, but in more competitive years, that can make a difference. And we will try to spread the funds as evenly as possible. So this year, this is an example of our timeline. And we have one round a year. We generally have about $600,000 in funds this year because of some decommitted projects from over the last year. We had about $800,000 in funds, and we received 1.9 million in requests. So this was one of our more competitive years. We could only fund, between 1/3 and 1/2 of projects that came in, despite many being like great projects that were eligible, that we're working with the Agency of Agriculture, but we just did not have the funds to spread it around. In other years, we've been closer to that, being able to fund 1/2 to 2/3 mark. I think it just depends on the outreach and the overall need and capacity of farms that year. So usually applications are open in November, due in January. We had, share out award decisions in April. And then farms or farm businesses usually have about 18 months to complete the project. And these funds are on a reimbursement, or this grant fund is on a reimbursement basis. So a farmer will have to reach out to me with their project invoices. I will see that they have spent the money on generally what they had applied to us for. If a budget, the actual budget is slightly different than the application budget, that's okay. But we do usually like to have a conversation to check that those invoices are lining up the way that we thought they would. And then we will write a check for the grant amount. We generally prefer to do this once during a project because it's a pretty big paperwork lift. It's easier for us to see that they've met the requirements. But if a farm is having concerns around cash flow to get the project done. Their contractor is like, we really need to get paid this year and the rest of the work won't be able to get done until next. We can do a partial disbursement of up to 50% of the award halfway through. But again, we will still need to see invoices to see that the project or the grant award and the required match has been spent. And then because so many of our projects are co-funded with the Agency of Agriculture, are co-funded with NRCS, our reporting requirements are generally quite low. In comparison, we know that a lot of times farms are already doing a lot of reporting to either of those agencies. So we may do a site visit so that we can get those great photos so that we can go in the field to get a better sense of the work that's being done. But that's not necessarily required. We do sometimes ask for photos at the time of disbursement. But again, if you've been able to provide those invoices, a lot of times we'll cross-reference with the Agency of Agriculture as well to make sure things are lining up. And then from there, folks don't usually hear from us too much. So applications for this year will be open in November 2024. We'll probably follow that same timeline. And one thing I didn't mention here was that if a farm, for whatever reason, if there are delays or holdups in the process, if they had planned to do construction this summer and their farm flooded, we totally understand things happen. It's very easy for us to extend that timeline if they need it, if they've been in contact with us. So I think that's the end of my overview. Like Calley, I'm happy to chat about any questions that come up, especially for conservation district staff who may be working with farms who are interested in applying, because we do kind of have this more flexible pot of funding. I feel like we do get a lot of questions that come up of like, would this be eligible? And I'm always happy to talk it through. Sometimes it can be in a gray zone. A lot of times what I find is that those projects that people reach out to me saying, is this eligible? The answer is usually, yeah, it sounds like it would be eligible, but it just might not be very competitive. So a lot of times it's just, is it worth it for you to complete the application? And I see that we have some questions in the chat. All right, from Myra. The farm receives an EQIP contract, they can use the EQIP money as your one-to-one match. Yes. Again, it's generally if it's for the same project, but yes, that happens pretty often. Usually if a farm is working with EQIP, they are usually often working with BMP's EQIP Assist as well. So it's usually NRCS, BMP, and then us to fill in any of those gaps. And then Donald, farmers need a couple of steps. Yep. Should farmers do multiple requests to do the stepping up in commitment, or is it competitive to anticipate the whole project as once? So that's a good question, Donald. We generally would only make one award per project or per farm. And so what I would recommend is applying to us, not quite in the very beginning stages, but usually once that engineer has been out there, once there is a project plan formulated, once there is a funding plan that's been a bit formulated. So whether or not you have a BMP contract signed, or if you've just been in conversation with an engineer and they've been out to your farm, that's okay. But we generally like to see that some of this planning has already been done before funding a project, which is tough with the timing sometimes, I understand. And we do encourage farms to apply multiple years in a row. If they didn't get it the first year, a lot of times that can demonstrate like commitment to the project, and we can even see growth between years in project applications. Are there any other questions? I'm going to stop my sharing.
Thank you both. That was really great. Appreciate your time and expertise. We have a lot of new staff. We've talked about this, but especially since the last 4 years in COVID, and we have a new kind of way of this hybrid way that we function. And so maybe for new and seasoned staff, what are some like just really core things to keep in mind, like maybe like 1 to 2 things as they're keeping these resources in their back of their minds and they're working with farmers.
I can go first. I think kind of my key takeaway is if you're new staff, either with a conservation district or with NRCS or something in between, I know there's often some overlap there. If you're working with a farm that has a water quality project already in the works, has NRCS funding, and is like, oh gosh, that 90% is actually kind of tough or kind of limiting, that's when you should definitely reach out to us.
I think for the business planning piece, I think there's been maybe 2 people since I started this job that actually reached out and said, I want to do business planning. That's why I'm calling you. I feel like it's kind of like reading between the lines a lot of times with businesses to figure out if it's something they could want. When they say things like, I'm just not able to pay my bills, or I'm way behind on my grain bill, or I'm just not even sure if I'm making money on this crop, or I don't know where we're going to be 5 years from now. You know, we need to plan for retirement, but I don't know how to approach it. There's all these kind of things that people can say that our program, I mean, a lot of people still don't know our program exists, even though we've been around a long time, especially those who aren't. There's businesses that are always engaged in resources. They, you know, they're the ones who applied all the grants, who do all the programs, you know, there's kind of that group, and then there's ones who've never done any of that. And then there's this whole kind of middle section of people who they've kind of dabbled in different ones, they've heard about some, and they're finding some value in it, but they still, you know, don't know about a program like ours. We did find during COVID, there was kind of like a whole new group that started gaining access to resources that maybe hadn't before. We did like a COVID recovery program. We did a lot of things. So we were able to get access to a lot more people who maybe had never heard of us, which was great. And I think that's continued. So my point on that is, it may not be that you hear a business say, I need business planning, but they may have questions or ideas, and you might be able to say, I think there's a program that could help you with that. Let me just have you connect with Calley and you can see. And I have no issue with talking to anybody, really. Like, I'm very, very, very accessible to anyone who wants to chat. And the other thing is, a lot of people do come into our program originally through crisis. They're in a lot of debt. They're looking at bankruptcy. The flood happened, you know, or the organic dairy crisis that happened. So they may come in with like an initial crisis urgent need, and then we help move them into a proactive planning process. That's very common. I mean, most human beings do not function in a way that is about long-term planning, and we just don't. So that's totally fine. They don't need to at all. And we can still really support people, and at the very least, probably move the needle for them, and to get to a better decision-making place. And if nothing else, hopefully they leave our program feeling like, wow, I just understand my business a lot more. And when I make decisions, it's coming from like a full understanding of financials, or looking at my quality of life. Or, you know, some people decide not to farm after doing a program because they've looked at the numbers, and that's obviously not our goal. But it's however people end up after a program, we just hope that they feel like more informed and have agency in their decision-making from it.
Thank you. I think that's a really great place for us to wrap up. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I will be sending out the recording and where you can find more information. Folks, I did put a link to a very brief survey. We appreciate your feedback on those. They help us to continue to put these on and fine tune and have topics that you want to hear about. Thank you so much, Betsy and Calley. This was great. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.